Hello everyone, and welcome to a different kind of video. Usually you guys know me for my scripted cave story content, but today we're actually given a weird situation. Um, so a little bit of spoilers for what my next video was going to be. It was going to be a video about Cave Story's challenge levels. And for those who don't know what the challenge levels are, they are a series of levels found in Cave Story's challenge mode that you have to unlock, and you're given the opportunity to speedrun them and share your times online. This includes things like the Sanctuary Time Attack, the Boss Rush, Wind Fortress, levels like those. I was going to make a video on those next. However, due to the Nintendo Switch 12.0 update, those levels crash. Like, upon opening any of those levels, the levels just crash. And I thought it was just me, but it seems like places like the Cave Story Reddit and just other Nintendo Switch users are having this problem. So it's interesting to see this go down. That video is not cancelled. It, of course, will be back in production once the bug is fixed, if it is ever fixed. So I do apologize if you guys were now looking forward to that, but don't worry. I have this video, which I'll be talking about in a second, as well as another video being worked on after this that will hopefully be out very soon. But for now, we're going to be doing something a little bit simpler, a little bit more on the spot, and I'm sorry if this seems more awkward compared to my other content. Today we're going to be ranking the weapons in Cave Story. For those who don't know, there are 10 different weapons in Cave Story. And one thing I do want to say, this list is pretty opinionated, but I think most people will share these opinions. I could be very wrong though. But yeah, there are 10 weapons in Cave Story. You cannot end the game with all 10. I think the most you could end up with is 5. I could be wrong though. Because most of these are transformative or use another weapon or upgrades to said weapons. But we're going to be grading each one individually, even the different levels of them. So, without a further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the first weapon we have, which is the blade here. The blade is a very good weapon. It's a stupid good weapon. Lore-wise, it's really good because it's passed on to you by King, who is then in the level 3 version of the blade. So not only do you get to avenge King, but King will help you avenge himself. Because King is kind of like that. But it definitely is a really cool weapon. I am in love with the level 3 version just for that lore factor alone. Not to mention, this weapon is actually just straight up one of the best in the game. And it's not even for level 3, it's actually for level 2. So if you don't know, the level 2 blade you can pretty much just use as much as you want as long as the blade isn't out. So as soon as the blade disappears, you can use it again. The thing is, the blade disappears upon contact with an enemy. So if you're fighting a boss, an enemy who is constantly standing until their HP is down, you can just be very close to the boss and just spam the blade as much as you want. And you will do tons of damage. You will melt health with the level 2 blade. You could watch speedruns of Cave Story. Most of speedrunners use level 2 blade in their runs, depending on which enemies. I think some of them just use it even just casually going through the game. But it's a stupid good weapon. It's a seriously good weapon. We do not deserve it. Blade's going in S. Of course, all this praise is going to lead to Blade going in S. I do not think there is any situation where the Blade is a bad weapon. There are situations where other weapons are preferred, but it's not a bad weapon. Speaking of bad weapons, next up we have the Bubbling, and I don't think it's the worst weapon. I might change my mind about that, but I don't think it's the worst weapon. It is not the greatest in the game, that is for sure. The level 1 is awful. It just shoots little bubbles that don't do much damage. The level 2 is much better, and I love the level 2. It's just like an automatic bubble launcher. And the level 3 is great. the level 3, as long as you hold the button down, you can just accumulate this cloud of bubbles around you and then fire them all at once, which just makes this beautiful mess of stars on the screen. It's really rad. However, besides the sand zone, I can't really think of a place where the bubbling would be exactly helpful. Maybe Labyrinth Fight? Or I forget which Labyrinth zone it is. I think Labyrinth M? The one with Curly. It might help you there, just because the bubbles can, like, float up and then you could shoot over some areas without any risk at all. But once you knock it down back to 1, it's a pretty awful weapon. Level 2 is decent, but the level 3 is pretty much the one you're always going to want with the bubbling. And because it's so strict and so situational, I think I'm going to put it in C, but that is subject to change. Next up, we have the Fireball. And I love the Fireball. Fireball's a really good weapon. It's a stupid good weapon, in fact. However, it is one of the weapons that I feel like is only good depending on where you're at. Not as situational as the bubbling would be, but it really is good on very hill-based levels and very low, very low enemies. So I feel like these Fireball is built for the grasslands. It's of course really good in other situations. And other levels. It does kind of have the same effect as the blade does, in which when the bullets leave the screen, you could immediately use another one. And which level the Fireball is on depends on how many bullets you're allowed on screen. So the level 1 you get 2, the level 2 you get 3, and the level 3 you get 4. And it's really good. I would say that another situation like the Fireball is in is with bosses. Like when you're fighting Balfrog, or I think it's Omega X? I think Omega X is the first boss in the Sand Zone. I could be wrong. Or I think it's just called Omega. Yeah, it's just called Omega, and then I'm confusing it with Monster X. Against those bosses, it's amazing. It's one of the greatest weapons you could possibly be given. Just because you get so much ammo out at once, and then you could just constantly spam that ammo as much as you want. And since Omega and Balfrog's like hurt boxes are so low to do damage, the Fireball is perfect for that because it just stays on the ground. It is a personal favorite of mine, but I'll try to let some bias slip by. I think I want to put Fireball in A. I want to put it in S, but I think I'll put it in A for now. Next up, we have the Machine Gun, and the Machine Gun is... Okay, the Machine Gun is a good weapon. The only thing that holds the Machine Gun back is that you have to trade the Polar Star for it, which is an awful trade. I don't think the Machine Gun is bad at all. I just think the Polar Star is better, but not for the Polar Star. And if you know what I mean, you know what I mean. And we'll eventually talk about it later in the video. But the Machine Gun it's just not worth it in my opinion. A very, very good weapon. And early on in game, if you get it to level 3, you could of course use it to hover. And of course you get tons of bullets out at a time. You could just spam that weapon all you want with little to no worry of running out of ammo. Especially since it just recharges itself, which is probably something I should have mentioned about the bubbling. The bubbling is only allowed 100 bullets. I believe it's the same for the Machine Gun, but I could be wrong. But you know, it allows you to hover before you get the booster. It allows multiple bullets all at once without having to wait for any bullets to disappear like the blade or the Fireball. It's just a pretty free weapon, and you don't really have to care. It does really good damage. It's just not worth trading the Polar Star for. If you could choose what to trade it for, I would maybe say you could trade it for the Fireball after the Sand Zone, but it's just not gonna do it for me here, Chief. The Machine Gun is gonna go in. I think I'll put it in A. I mean B. Sorry. Next up, we have the regular missile launcher. Some of you guys might notice that I do have the super here. Yes, I am judging them separately. And I'm gonna go ahead and judge the missile launcher purely based off of like when you get it. I know that's a little bit unfair, especially since it's gonna kind of contradict something I bring up with the super missile launcher. But the regular missile launcher, it's alright. I mean, collecting this thing just gives me anxiety until I get the super missile launcher, purely because I have to do a lot of ammunition check. I always have to make sure that like I have the good amount of resources. Of course, the game just tosses you missiles like candy, but whenever I'm playing, I always feel like I never have enough. I'll never feel like I have enough missiles, so I just end up never using the regular missile launcher. I just don't use it. It of course does a lot of damage. You are only allowed one missile on screen at a time, I believe. I could be wrong about that. I should have double checked that, but it feels like you're only allowed one missile on screen at a time. But let me go ahead and think about it, even if you were allowed multiple, just to be safe. Even if you were allowed multiple on screen, it's still not worth it, because it's a lot of commitment for this weapon. Because the missile shoots straight forward. And while it does do a lot of damage, it travels pretty slow, but also like strangely fast, if that makes sense. Just like never at a good enough speed. And there's always a chance that you could miss the missile, especially with like bosses against like Balfrog. Like he could just jump at the wrong time and things like that. And even Balrog could jump at the wrong times when you're trying to use a missile. And if you miss a missile, I just feel like I lose too much. A good weapon, but makes me stressed out. It's going in B tier. Next up, we have the Nemesis, and the Nemesis is really good. Super powerful weapon, and it's actually the weapon Curly ends up using in the Bloodstained Sanctuary, if you, of course, go the true ending route. And the Nemesis is just dope. It's a very powerful weapon. However, it's only good in the hands of Curly, purely because Curly always keeps the level 1 Nemesis. So for those of you who don't know, the Nemesis is another secret weapon. It's the second secret weapon on here. Or I guess the third if you technically count the machine gun. The Nemesis you must trade the blade for in order to, obtain. And some would debate that you don't need the blade that late game. But the way the Nemesis works is that you want it at a low level. When you power up the Nemesis, it actually gets weaker, and the level 3 Nemesis shoots a short range like amount of rubber ducks that only do 1 damage at a time. And as adorable and as funny as that is, it does make it a pretty bad weapon, or at least in my case. The way I play Case Story, I'm constantly making sure all my levels are at max. The Nemesis does come in really good handy in places like the beginning of the Bloodstained Sanctuary and places like the last cave when all weapons are dropped to level 1. It's perfect for levels like those. But by the time you're at the end of the last cave and by the time you're at the end of the Bloodstained Sanctuary, I think that's the least of your worries. I think you're going to be relying on things like the Super Missile Launcher, maybe even the Spur if you went that route, or even the Blade by the time you get to the end of those levels and even after those levels. So purely based off that, I do think the Nemesis is still really good, purely because of its counter in pretty specific situations. I'm going to put it in A. Purely because, like, even when you do keep it at level 1, which is not hard to do, like, just take damage, it's a stupid powerful weapon. Like, it's nuts. It's insanely powerful. So don't underestimate the Nemesis, just, it's the Nemesis. Next up, we have the Polar Star. And this weapon right here is, I know it's going to sound a little bit crazy, but I'll explain right now, is single-handedly why the Bubbling is in C tier. I think the Polar Star is the worst weapon in the game. It does awful damage at level 1. mediocre damage at level 2, and subpar damage at level 3. I mean, when you have it level 3 early game, of course, it's a really good weapon. It's super helpful, and being able to, you know, shoot a level 3 bullet at any time is incredibly helpful. But of course, it gets stupid weak. It gets insanely weak when at level 2 and at level 1. And if you have a level 2 or level 1 Polar Star late game, why'd you even keep it? Just why did you even keep the Polar Star? You should have taken the machine gun, or maybe even traded it for the snake, which we'll be talking about in a moment here. It's a bad weapon overall. Early game, super good. In the long run, Polar Star is just straight up, it's the worst weapon in the game. But again, there is a reason why some people might say it's not, and we'll get to that in a second. Next up, we have the snake. The snake is an interesting weapon. It is the only weapon that shoots through walls, and its damage is alright. Shooting through walls is of course really helpful, especially when you get it. When you get it from the shop Gaudi, I forget its name, the shop Gaudi specific name, but the Gaudi that protects the shop in the labyrinth, when you get it from him, it's a pretty good time, because the labyrinth fight level has a lot of walls and a lot of enemies past walls, and that's a super good weapon to have at that time. You might be able to debate that it's also really good for the Bloodstained Sanctuary. I personally wouldn't say so, especially when you have to trade the Fireball and the Polar Star for it. Now, when you're that late game, you can debate that you don't need the Fireball and the Polar Star anymore. And my process isn't really that you're losing the Fireball. I'm totally down for losing the Fireball late game. My problem is losing the Polar Star late game, and I'll talk about that again in a second. But if you had to choose between the snake and keeping the Polar Star and Fireball, I would say keep the Polar Star and Fireball, purely for the Polar Star alone. I know, bad weapon, but it leads to this, which we're going to talk about right now. The snake is going to go B tier, purely because it's an interesting weapon. It does decent damage, but nothing for A. Basically, the snake's gonna go bottom of B. Actually, no, it's not as good as the missile launcher. I'm gonna put it the top of C tier. Which, by the way, I will say, so far this is ordered. So far, I think this is the order I like. Next up, we're actually gonna skip the spur. We're gonna save the spur for last, because I feel like everybody knows where that's gonna go. The super missile launcher. Way better version of the missile launcher, and by the time you get the super missile launcher, you're probably far enough to where you don't even have to worry about ammo. You get so many like ammo increases by the time you get the super missile launcher, you're probably not even worried. Like, you're literally gonna end the game with, I think, like 55 missiles. I could be wrong, maybe even more, maybe a little bit less, but I think around the 50th range is how much you have, and that's more than enough. By the time you get those 54, you know you have more than enough. And it does insanely good damage. It shoots multiple missiles at once. It's insanely good. It's super good. I'm gonna put it the top of A. Just really good weapon. No reason not to have it. Literally makes the missile launcher worth like keeping at level 3, because when you carry the missile launcher to level 3 and upgrade it, it makes the super missile launcher level 3 too, and it's just too good. And finally, we have the spur. I'm just gonna go ahead and say it. I think the spur is better than the blade. I think it is. It's way too good. It's super good. Any boss loses to this weapon. Like, really, any boss you're playing against loses to this weapon. Of course, you get this weapon pretty late game, and the damage output, I think, is slightly better on the blade, purely because level 2 blade, you don't have to wait. The spur, you just charge. At the cost of, like, not having to trip about leveling it up. Because its leveling up system is just holding the button. You don't have to collect experience points for it. It's just how long you're willing to hold the button on which kind of bullets you want. Its level 1 is the level 3 spur. Its level 2 is like the level 2 spur, but it's longer beams that do more damage. And then level 3 spur is just nuts. The bullet literally looks like the image here. It's insanely good. I know some people are probably going to say that level 2 blade is better purely because you don't have to wait for the charge. And maybe to speedrunners that would be a good reason to have the level 2 blade, but I could be wrong. I don't speedrun Cave Story. But to me, the spur is just the best weapon in the game. The bullet stays out for a really long time. It's going to do tons of damage if it hits, especially at level 3. You can just spam a level 3 Polar Star as its level 1. That's just stupid good. It's just the best weapon in the game. If you ask me, it's the best weapon in the game. And once again, I would still say this is order. We have the Polar Star as the worst and only bad weapon in the game. Bubbling and Snake, decent. The Bubbling is just a secret weapon. You don't really have to get it. You don't have to get the Bubbling if you don't want to. The Snake, you do have to sacrifice the Fireball and the Spur towards, so it's not worth it if you ask me, but it's a decent weapon. Missile Launcher is really good. I just don't like worrying about the bullets, but that's a personal thing. Outside of the personal thing, I do think it's a little bit lower than like the Machine Gun, which is just really good. It's personal preference. I know a lot of people are going to be like, well, why is the Polar Star like so low? But you say like the Machine Gun's not worth it, and that's because Spur. Nemesis, really good. I love this weapon. I think it's super funny. It makes me go hee hee whenever I have the ducks, and the ducks are the only reason why I would get the Nemesis. But I just hate worrying about the ducks if I'm being like serious. It's a funny haha, but it's not worth losing the blade to me. Fireball, really good, just super good weapon. Acts similarly to the blade with its bullets, but except it's super situational in very specific parts of the game. The Super Missile Launcher, one of the best weapons in the game. If it were unlimited ammo, it would easily be, it might even be above blade if it were unlimited ammo, but because it's limited ammo, it's going top of A. And then of course, blade and spur, there is literally nothing wrong with these weapons. Like I said, people could debate that the blade is the best weapon in the game, you could debate the spur is the best weapon in the game. It's insane. But yeah, that's gonna be my tier list for each weapon in Cave Story. Once again, I'm sorry if this like video seems a little bit on the lazier side, but I did think about these weapons a little bit when starting this video, and I promise there will be a scripted video coming soon. I'm gonna go ahead and leave a link to this tier list in the description below. For those who haven't joined the Discord, please go ahead and join the Discord if you'd like. It's in my channel banner. And then go ahead and share your tier list with me there. I would love to see them. I want to see people put like the spur in C, like the machine gun in S, and the blade in B, and then convince me why. I would love to see something like that. But anyways, I'm just gonna go ahead and fix that because that's chaotic. Anyways, this is my tier list. Thank you so much for watching. There will be another scripted video, hopefully out by the end of the week. And I think you guys are going to like it. It's going to be on the Mimiga. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys when that video is out. Until then, Nerdieo is out.